Have a joke that I have between my lead pastor and I is I don't know if this is too crass for this podcast, but I'm just go for it. It's not too I don't think it's too offbeat, but I think it helps describe our musical idiom here. Is if you could describe it like this, where if John Piper and Steve Furtick met in a bar one night, had a one night stand, and had an illicit child, that would probably be what the well would be probably described by the next morning. It's a funny metaphor, but there's something palpable about it where you take like a ultra reformed John Piper-esque substantive world that our church has swum in for a long time, but if you pull too hard in that one direction musically, you can really lose people unnecessarily, whereas like the Steve Furtick elevation side of things, for better or for worse, what does it have going for it? It has singability, but you can pull too hard in that direction too.
Scott Gayer, welcome to the Churchfront Worship and Tech Podcast.
Thank you, Luke. Man, it is so good to be here. Thank you for having me, homie.
You bet, man. Hey, Scott, you and I have kind of run in the same circles for a while, and it's been fun to get to know you over the past couple of years, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners, tell them who you are, what you do, and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have run in similar circles. And I think I've known you, Luke, probably since almost I landed here in Denver area, like around 2016. Yeah. When you were kind of holding down the fort at the first church I was serving as a worship pastor. So I still owe you quite a few things from all you did there, man. So you and I have known each other for at least that long, even though you've moved back and forth. But yeah, I am currently the worship pastor at a church in Boulder called The Well. Been here since about 2017, and been basically leading this ministry for about half the life of the church at this point. So The Well is a little over, coming up to 12 years old or so. So my wife and I kind of just eventually tractor beamed up to this area. Didn't really come seeking out this position. The kind of long and short of, my life, like leading worship as a worship pastor. I always joke with people. My resume says I've, worked at 6 or 7 churches in the last 10 plus years or so, but that's not because I like the church hop. It's just, we've moved around a lot. And every time we move, for some reason, God has continued to navigate me to this role. And finding that this place in Boulder that we're at our church community has been definitely one of the good longer stints that we're grateful to not have to be moving as so much at this like sector of our life for either of our jobs or families. So we've been rooted here for about since 2017, and that's kind of this is probably like the 6th or 7th like worship ministry I've had the pleasure of leading and orchestrating. I've been able to lead in kind of multiple contexts over like since my life, like leading worship, really like mega church style, like large 2,000 plus church worship ministries that I've been in charge of leading, to church plants that of like 50, kind of when you and I first connected, to our kind of mid-sized, lower-sized church community we're in right now, about 150 to 300, and historic buildings that I've been able to lead worship in, to bars. That's kind of been the wide gambit of how the life has led me. Yeah, I'm like leading worship up to this point. So that's kind of where I've landed at this point. So I'm actually very, very content to be at about the size that I'm at right now. After going through everything from like a mega church complexity of leading worship to a church plant where everything's just like gritty, kind of being in this in-between stage feels like kind of, I guess, the happy marriage of both of the spectrums I've been on.
Yeah.
So,
it's cool to hear a little bit more about your background story. What got you into worship ministry to begin with? I mean, it started, you've been in different contexts, but what was kind of the calling like into that role? Or was it just a supplementary piece? Like, walk the listeners through a little bit of your story there.
Sure. Yeah. I, from an early age, I think about 12 years old. By God's grace, like I was in a Baptist church growing up with my parents, and I was just learning kind of like how to play guitar. Just kind of like sucked me in, and kind of just went headlong into it. And our church was at a point in time where they needed more people to play. And so, really, at about the age of 14, 15, I started regularly serving with men who were like 40 years old plus, regularly putting music together weekly. And that, looking back, was pretty formidable for me. You get to, there's not too many times in life where I feel like guys that age get to rub shoulders with guys who are three times their age and participate in like that kind of ministry. So that was really the groundwork for me. I would say all the way through high school, played electric and acoustic guitar, and didn't start singing in a worship context really until halfway through college. Campus ministry was a big part of my story in a campus ministry called InterVarsity, which is one of the kind of major three on a lot of college campuses. And InterVarsity was a significant portion of my life. I always kind of joke with people I probably majored in campus ministry more than what I was supposed to major in college, just because I just kind of, once I got my feet wet in worship ministry in college, it just kind of kept snowballing for me. It was something that I could definitely say for the whole course of my life is something I've never really sought out, but kept kind of seeking me out in ways I didn't expect. My wife always jokes with me. The first time she heard me sing, she thought it was so horrible. And a lot of people know that story too. And I'm totally fine admitting that, because singing was something that I had to kind of come into my own on in terms of no formal training. But I think, with a lot of musicians, if it's in you, it just starts to come out. And so over time, midway through college, I was kind of handed the keys for our worship ministry there. And our worship leader at the time was like, "Hey, I need someone else I'm graduating. You're a really good guitar player, and hope you figure out how to sing." So he just kind of did me, pushed me into the corral, man. And that was pretty formidable for me. And I would say from there, in terms of like formal, like entrance into like, vocational, like paid worship ministry, our church we were a part of in college, this was in Reno in Nevada. So I'm originally from Reno, Nevada, Lake Tahoe, Nevada, actually, for most of my life. And so I went to university in Reno, and our church we were a part of there at the time, alongside our campus ministry, started to also have a big need for people to lead worship within their services. And our worship pastor there kind of started to, looking back now, it's a pretty smart movie. And he's like, "All right, so who are the dudes leading campus ministry worship that I, can just hit the ground running with, and just throw them into the ringer and have them start leading." So that would, I think, be a major turning point for me in terms of, I would say, like a stylistic and maybe like approach to like worship culture that I hadn't been exposed to yet, was through our church we were a part of in college. At that time, our church was a part of kind of the early days of Acts 29. So Mars Hill, when it was seemingly healthy then, for better or for worse, was a big influencer on our church in college.
Yeah.
In terms of a lot of things, whether it was, Reformed theology, and all the things that came with that. But really the music of Mars Hill really like began to make more of a inroad with me. Up to that point, I'd been kind of used to leading, a lot of the typical fare of a lot of, at that time, would have been like major top 40 tunes and stuff from Hillsong, and, knowing how to lead hymns and those sorts of things. But Mars Hill was sort of like, I still kind of count it as this other sector of the worship world that is still
Totally.
pretty valid in terms of like, it has its pluses and minuses in terms of its style of leading. But I was like, man, like you can um, play like in worship music in this style, and that's actually legal. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
let's go for it. So, and my church literally was encouraging it. So,
Yeah. I want to
they
pause
had,
you right there. Will you
yeah,
tell people, some people listening
yeah,
would be unfamiliar or maybe newer to
sure,
that genre. I mean, it's still like worship
yeah,
music, but tell
yeah,
people what you mean by the distinction between kind of top
hmm
40 CCM music and what more of
yeah,
the King's Kaleidoscope, Citizens, that kind of genre would
yeah,
be, and what
yeah,
would stand out as different.
yeah. I would say the top 40 CCM, and this isn't a knock on it, but that sector of music is kind of beholden to, I would say, like a whole major industry of music. I don't see you anymore, Luke, so
Yeah,
hopefully
I
you're
just
still
moved it
there. Okay,
over
cool.
so you're full
So
screen.
you're good. Uh, so that sector of music is kind of beholden to, I would say, a larger, long-standing industry that's linked to like public radio, that's very accessible to people, right? And it kind of has to probably fit some certain marks in terms of its production quality, its style, and whether it will probably sell. That's
Yeah.
that's kind of what, I'm not saying that's bad or good, but that is kind of how in a basic way I've seen it function. And this other side I would call of the worship world, I would call it the underbelly of the worship world, probably still that still exists, is people who are retuning really old music and setting it in a way that you might hear in a very secular context musically, that's not beholden to top 40 Christian radio. It's basically taking two worlds that normally haven't ever associated before and saying, hey, how can we marry these in a way that, at least for me at the time, was really fascinating, because I grew up listening to a lot of indie rock, even though I was a church kid, and grew up listening to, coming up in the 90s and exposed to all that music. And kind of felt this like connection of like, hey, I think this is useful. And this is also fun just as a musician, and so that's how I would kind of separate both worlds. And there's a lot more beyond. Marso is just kind of like, I think, the beginning of it. Like
Totally.
beyond there's a lot of great places to check out. Like Cardiphonia is a great resource for people to check out a lot of that. Bifrost Arts, um, uh, Poor Bishop Hooper is
Yeah.
another one that's been. I've actually met those guys in person. They're great. Kind of people who are retuning, I would call, old music in a
Yeah.
way that is doesn't sound like probably what you would hear on Christian radio.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what got me the bug there. Hopefully that answers your question.
Totally. That was
And I
great.
can
Yeah, that was
I
a
can
great
I can
description
keep
of it.
going. Yeah, if you want on, I can keep going on my story if you want, or if
That's
that helps
perfect.
kind of separate that out.
Yep.
So that kind of took me off to the races in a sense of like, I just started kind of leading worship in that vein, where I was kind of given the permission, if you will, from our
Yeah.
worship pastor at the time to be like, hey, they had a band model at the time. But like, again, they were just taking a lot of notes from Mars Hill. They're like, Mars Hill has bands. We should have bands. Let's do bands. So, most people might be used to like a rotation typically in a
Yeah.
worship ministry. There's one main leader and players rotate with that leader. So this was a kind of a big formidable experience for me too. Just
Yeah.
being able to like be given, hey, here's 5 people you're going to play with every week, and you're going to write music with these people every week. And it's kind of like the sky's the limit in that sense of the word. So that
I
changed
love
a
it.
lot of things for me, like, I think that's maybe not necessarily everybody's experience in their foray and leading worship at large, if you're kind of growing up in a either long-standing older congregation, and sometimes that's the benefit of being in a church plant, is there's less limits, so there's more opportunities to try stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I did that for a while throughout college. I led a band in that kind of worship ministry context. I was one of like 3 bands that would rotate and lead in our college. At the time, it was the college sector of our church. Um, and about at the time I was graduating college, my worship pastor looked at me and he was like, "Hey man, what do you really want to like do with your life? You're kind of like, I see you're really committed to this, and if you could like kind of name it right now, like what would you do?" And I was like, honestly, man, if I had the opportunity to like lead worship full time, I'd do it. And at that point in time, I think that was a hinge point that I needed to self realize. And at that point, I went a direction I didn't expect, but was definitely necessary. Our church was kind of two churches in one. It was a part of a mega church, and I was part of the college ministry of that church. And the college ministry had grown so large that it needed to plant. It
Okay.
was basically a church that was being planted
Wow.
out of our mega church. So it had grown to 800 plus congregation inside a 2,000 plus congregation.
The college ministry was 800
It was,
plus.
yeah, it was growing
Holy
pretty
cow.
formidably. So like it was time to plant. But they were also very, doing things differently in terms of ministry practice.
Yeah.
Like you basically had this kind of Mars Hill esque kind of church inside
Sure.
a kind of a mainline evangelical mega church. And they're like, hey,
Sure.
like these are both working well, but it can only go for so long.
Right.
And so it was kind of a do or die point where our church was starting to plant out. And I had this question in my mind. I was like, am I just going to go and keep doing this with this band? Or should I, peel back and finish grad school? I was in grad school at the time for half my life has also been in media production. So I have like a bachelor's and master's in journalism and kind of sold out to the man, if you will, in that sense in college. I almost went through, I double majored in music for one semester and media for one semester and realized you can't do those both well at the same time. And
Yeah.
ultimately sold out. I was like, all right, I'll just go work in the media and play music for fun. But I ended up about a week after that conversation, our main planting church had an opening where they needed an associate worship leader to work
Okay.
under their senior worship pastor. And it wasn't the job I was necessarily looking for, but it was one that I wasn't unwilling to explore
Right.
because it was an opportunity. And
Yep.
sometimes those opportunities aren't always 100% perfect, but they are opportunities that aren't necessarily wrong or right.
Right.
And so I ended up auditioning for that role and was hired on for that role and ended up leaving the band I was leading and went back into leading mainline evangelical top 40 CCM worship again.
Mhm.
Totally what I wouldn't expect myself to be doing. But the church was interested in kind of like the blend of where I had been
Yeah.
and where the church was. So I was kind of allowed to do both,
Yeah.
and I felt like that was a good expression of myself because I could, some guys who are kind of only in the Acts 29 or Mars Hill style of worship leader, you throw them into like a mainline evangelical top 40 worship leader role and they're like fish out of
Don't know what
water.
to
They're
do.
like,
Yeah.
how do you sing a Hillsong song? How do I do this? Um, where's the distortion pedal? Something,
Yeah, exactly.
So I was kind of allowed to kind of do both in essence because our church realized, the planting church realized, as you have a mass exodus of 800 college students for your mainline church, you basically have a vacuum of like, a certain aesthetic that's gone.
Yeah.
And so in essence, I was brought on to kind of solve that, if you will, stylistically for our church in many ways and serve under our associate worship pastor, who was like, I mean, for a guy who could have held the reins really tightly, being there for 20 years, gave me a lot of freedom, invested in me, but also I learned so much from on the tech and production side that I wouldn't have learned otherwise,
Yeah.
And he kind of let me be my own person musically. So it's kind of
So
unique.
cool.
That's kind of that would probably be like the main. I was in that role for about 3-4 years before we moved away to the Midwest for my wife to go through some medical training in her profession
Cool.
and go to med school. So
Yeah.
I kind of hung up the cleats for a while and took a big break. Worked in advertising and marketing as a creative director and writer and shot a lot of commercials and just kind of took a break from ministry, which sometimes is a big blessing.
Yeah.
I think I had been doing it full bore since I was, I guess, 18 to like 23, pretty young, I guess, to get thrown into full-time ministry. And you didn't realize how many lessons need to be learned and how much you see in that time, for better or for worse.
Totally.
So yeah, I guess that was church number 2, and I guess there's like 3 more left after that. But I'll spare you all that. And the fast forward version from that is, I ended up taking eventually a full-time worship role as a church planting worship leader in our congregation called Redeemer in Kansas City. So that was just our home church when we moved there for med
Yep.
school. And they eventually, as I served in the worship ministry there, had a need for, again, a guy to kind of like go out and plant a congregation. And they needed a full-time worship leader for that. And I was like, I think I'm ready to get back in, you know? And I would say that was a big hinge point for me. You know, not all of leading worship, as you know, is music. It's
Right.
liturgy as well.
Yeah.
And that was the Redeemer was huge for me in that essence of like learning how to even write a covenant renewal liturgy was like not something you generally learn in big evangelical mega churches. I'm just gonna, for better or
Or
for
in
worse,
or
you
in
know,
bachelor's programs for colleges. I mean, they're
right?
not.
They just don't teach you that, man. So
Yep.
the liturgical side of leading worship was a big hinge point for me there, in terms of like how to pull from those streams that
Yeah.
are become so much more profitable for us in the last 10 years, you know? Um, and so that was a big hinge point for me as well, as kind
Yeah.
of like building in that side of things. And our move to Denver Boulder was basically my wife taking her final step in the medical field to like kind of land the plane, if you will, in terms of the last part of her career training. So I moved here, exited our time at Redeemer, did spend a stint of time in Wichita at another church there as well. In between that time, that's the
Yeah.
church number 4, and got to lead worship in a historic church building, another church that was in the Acts 29 network that had just gotten a historic, massive building in downtown Wichita. So I kind of stepped into like, here's the keys to a building we don't know anything about
Yep.
and a worship ministry that you don't know anything about.
Yeah.
That was again a similar situation where we moved. I didn't have designs to find a worship pastor role, and it just kind of found me. Um,
It,
so
it has a
yeah,
unique
like
way of happening that way, doesn't it?
it does, man.
Oftentimes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty much the background story before we landed here. The
Yeah.
well again kind of found me right about the time I found the first church I ended up leading worship at when
Yeah.
I ended up connecting here in the Denver area. And man, I really don't hope I don't have to switch churches again because I'm on number 7. So that's that's kind of where I'm at the moment,
Yeah.
man.
Before we continue on with the video, a quick word from our sponsor, the Worship Ministry School Accelerator Program. You may not know this, but in addition to all the YouTube content we're creating here at Churchfront, we also partner with local church worship and production ministries to help them hit their ministry goals. Over the past 4 years, we've worked personally with hundreds of worship ministries around the globe. We've helped churches navigate upgrading their worship tech, building better systems to grow their team of volunteers, as well as address any knowledge or skill gaps required for modern day worship ministry. When you join the Accelerator program, you get access to our entire library of online, on-demand courses, and you get unlimited access to our team of Churchfront coaches. To learn more about joining the program, click the link below this video to apply and schedule your free strategy session today. Now let's get back to the video.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many things about your story are just piquing my interest. I want to know, is it kind of a full circle moment for you to be back in for those who don't know, Boulder has a massive college population. Like it's CU Boulder is a huge school in Boulder, Colorado, for that people come from really all over the world to go to and study there. And so
Oh yeah.
I don't know about their campus ministry involvement or what the well does, but is it kind of full circle for you to be back in kind of a college,
Yeah.
space with a lot of college students running around, and you're kind of in the heart of it in a church leading
Yeah.
worship? What does that meant
Yeah.
for you as a worship leader?
Bro, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it was one of probably the top 3 reasons my wife and I felt called to be in Boulder, because college ministry had impacted us so deeply. My wife became a Christian in college, you know. Her life was changed massively through our campus ministry. So I've seen it front side of like how they kind of say statistically that college is the last significant spiritual step that has a probability of going one of either ways for someone to live life as a Christian. After that, the statistics go down in terms of their probability of becoming a Christian if they're not already.
Wow.
So college is like a massively formidable time for people to become Christians or not. So knowing that was one of the top 3 reasons why we decided to jump into life and ministry here. You know, I don't do our college ministry here, but I do work with and have worked with a lot of college students who end up being interfacing with our church, you know, and in some ways from this is kind of a pragmatic benefit is, you know, once you get a college student who's a freshman involved in your worship ministry, it's a guarantee they'll be there for 4 years, man. So
That's right.
I just love it when I have a freshman right now who's a cello player who's like killer, gnarly, awesome. And I was like, man, thank God you're going to be here for 4 years. So it's like for better or for worse, you know.
Just keep feeding them. Keep just kind of shelling out a couple little gifts here and there, gift cards, Chipotle, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And keep them in the pocket for sure.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it is a really cool. I've had the opportunity to work with a few college students, and it made a big impact in my life. And kind of coming around full circle, you get to see the reasoning behind that. And I've, you know, our college ministry here. If you plant a church banking on that it's going to grow from college students, that's the wrong approach because they have you know no resources. They have a lot of heart. So we are just now at the point in our time here as a church where we can like actually comfortably invest in college students and know it's not going to, you know, kill us in the end, right? You know, we kind of have some home base. And the good thing about being a church that moves around a lot as we have is college students are kind of up for anything. They're like, okay, we're meeting in a bar. Okay, cool. We're meeting let's just do it. You know, so there's a plus side there.
Yeah.
But it has been, you know, I don't do all of our college events, but the one event I always make space for every year is the fair that's for freshmen every year, where our church is actually allowed to be on campus with a sign that says, come talk to us. Yeah. And I always make time to be at that and meet them because that was a moment that changed my life. Yep. And you don't know what could happen from there for somebody. And we met a lot of people that way. So it has been cool in that reason. It's been a big reason what's kept us, me and my wife, you know, continually seeing the impact here. Cause like you said, people come from all over the world to Boulder to go to school here. And there's not many places like that where you can say like you might have an international impact on somebody, right? Because of your church being around. Because people are coming to you, you're not even have to go to them. So there's something fascinating about it, despite you know, CU and Boulder not being the most hospitable place to Christians. It doesn't change the fact that they're still around.
Right. Yeah, and people will listen to this and they won't really understand the context unless they're familiar with Boulder. But I mean, Boulder really is it is kind of an uphill grind for churches. I mean, it's not Boulder's kind of a melting pot of all melting pots of types of people, you know, backgrounds, and I would say the evangelical Protestant kind of type of person doesn't really fit in there. You know, it is kind of it's almost like a unreached area if you, I mean, you know, to some extent there. I'd be curious as how that shapes, knowing that background, how does that shape your philosophy of leading a worship ministry there? I mean, walk people through kind of what the makeup of your worship ministry is there at the well. I mean, how do you do the band model? How do you pick songs and liturgy and introduce that stuff in an environment that's not super open to it?
Yeah, buddy. That's a great question, man. And I think in many ways I've seen how my backstory has made me able to kind of feel comfy in this kind of context where it's not the Bible Belt. It's not gonna, you know, be people around you aren't necessarily listening to top 40 Christian music all the time, you know? And so in that sense, there's been some like idioms musically that have been a natural fit for me already that kind of, I felt like were helpful in gaining traction here at the well. Like previous to me, worship pastor who was here before me was kind of leading the music aesthetically in a way that was really at home for me. You know, a lot of like indie rock, a lot of retuning old hymns into those kind of aesthetic settings, writing their own arrangements, a lot of medleys, a lot of mashups, to really kind of, I would say, help engage people in something. I would guess a big value of our church is being authentic. I think people in Boulder really have a subconscious radar for that, which is why I think if you are trying to plant in a way that's like top 40 big evangelical style in Boulder, it's people kind of see through it a little too quickly, you know, like they're not, they really have no interest in smoking lights, man. Like they're looking for substance, which is probably why they moved here in the first place, you know?
Yeah.
They're not impressed by kind of those trappings, which I don't think are something that I don't want to like poo-poo or downplay on here, because I know those contexts are super important for certain sectors of the country. They work really well.
Right.
But in Boulder, authenticity, I think, is something that I've had to pay attention to musically. So I really, for two reasons, pragmatically and aesthetically, I vary our music between kind of two spectrums of really like a kind of folk bluegrass idioms right now. I play a lot of banjo previous to like moving here. So it kind of was like, this area, people are bluegrass freaks, you know, they love it. Boulder and just the surrounding region. It's really at home for people to be totally comfortable worshiping with like an acoustic guitar and a banjo and a kick drum.
Yep.
Like that. Whereas the other bigger context would be like, this is kind of weird, you know?
Sure.
But like, I will vary sets between like a trio of something like that, you know, and like a more like kind of like indie rock retuned hymn type set.
Yep.
Kind of a joke that I have between my lead pastor and I is I don't know if this is too crass for this podcast, but I'm just go for it. It's not too I don't think it's too offbeat, but I think it helps describe our musical idiom here is. And it's a helpful thing for worship leaders to understand too, of like how to kind of, you're not the only person leading your worship ministry. Your lead pastor has a big influence in that usually. And sometimes it's more hands-on or hands-off, but it's important to pay attention to that because they're the people who are leading the heartbeat in many ways of how the church started and where they see it going. And so one of the first jokes I had with our lead pastor here is when he tried to describe how I'd like to see the worship ministry keep going. He's like, honestly, I wouldn't be too sad if some Sundays sounded like Alabama Shakes, you know? And also, if you could describe it like this, where if John Piper and Steve Furtick met in a bar one night, had a one night stand and had an illicit child, that would probably be what the well would be probably described by the next morning. You know, he's like, I wouldn't be too sad about that, where it's like, all of that wrapped up into one is just if you can imagine those two worlds coming together. And it's a funny metaphor, but there's something palpable about it where, you know, you take like a ultra reformed John Piper-esque substantive world that our church, you know, has swum in for a long time. But if you pull too hard in that one direction musically, you can really lose people unnecessarily, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas like the Steve Furtick elevation side of things, for better or for worse, what does it have going for it? It has singability. It has, you know, emotional power, but you can pull too hard in that direction too. And again, I think that represents kind of both areas I've straddled for most of my life, that I was not afraid when he like dropped that funny metaphor on him. I was like, oh, that makes sense. That's a funny way to put it, but
that's good.
I can do that. And I try to kind of, because people who are looking for an authentic reformed church can sometimes be a little snooty to a point where if you sing a Hillsong song at them, and they can almost unnecessarily get a little cringe when you're like, hey, but just so you know, like the Creed by Hillsong is actually really good theology.
Yeah.
You just don't like that it's Hillsong.
Right. And it's actually the Creed.
It's actually the Creed. So you can't really argue about it. and it's actually very singable.
Yeah.
So I tend to approach ministry from that context where I'm listening on an average week. I'm listening to like what Shane and Shane are doing.
Yeah.
And I'm also listening to obscure, like retuned hymn artists to understand what they're doing. And I kind of joke with my bands a lot that I'm sort of unashamedly addicted to medleys and mashups nowadays.
Same,
because they work in our context. Like not every song is picture perfect, but there's parts of songs that are perfect. And if you can make them work together, there can be great success there, because you're kind of helping people gain the best of what's really singable, but also what's theologically formidable. And you can't do that in every church context. Some churches, you literally have to have the recording from, praise charts, and your band, they need to just follow that. And that's good. And that's what's healthy for your worship ministry. And so this is, I've had to gauge kind of the ceiling for our musicians is they never knew any different when I came in the door, because they were already pretty much used to doing a lot of that work. Yeah. So I was like, great, well, let's just keep doing it and let's kind of keep building on that, but maybe dip our toe in the other side of stuff that you probably haven't liked singing, in terms of the top 40 arena, but like has some value and also helps kind of lower the bar appropriately for some people, So on an average Sunday, like we might be singing a retuned version of This Is My Father's World, which I just medleyed with King of Kings. I did that just yesterday. I did King of Kings medley with This Is My Father's World and a country rock vibe.
Yeah.
So people who like the song King of Kings would probably hate what I did to it, but I didn't change the melody. I didn't change the rhythmic cadence. You're still singing King of Kings. But This Is My Father's World is a really powerful theological hymn that talks about God's dominion over creation. And I want people to know how to sing that.
Yeah.
So that might be one of the better examples, if you will. There's other songs in our catalog that I do the exact same thing with. That I've medleyed together for those intensive purposes.
We'll have to have you do like a masterclass deep dive on mashup, medley, and honestly just being a well-rounded musician, because that you have to know the lingo and kind of the approach to communicate with your band on, how to approach these songs that are not only CCM, Christian radio hits, but also then taking some creative liberty with some hymns that you might have a hymnal to, you might have lyrics to, and no music to, you might have some music progression to, that gives you kind of an open space to, flex a little bit, to kind of, open up to fit the purpose of the gathering and any specific goals that you might have with not only your team, but also formation of your people. That musical approach could be pretty open-ended, and I'd be so excited to have you back for a part 2 to do a deep dive on that. I definitely want to ask you about the current season that the Well is in, because we were talking before we got on this podcast that you guys recently kind of lost your space that you've been meeting in. So tell people what is happening with the Well right now. Tell them about your building, tell them about where you guys are headed. And I have a couple key questions for you about this season, but give people the background context.
Yeah. So, I'll take you kind of like just before the pandemic hit. I guess I'll fast forward you through all that. So before the pandemic hit, we were meeting in a middle school. Our church was meeting through Boulder Valley schools. Typical thing a lot of churches do when they're trying to build a building or kind of exist for a while. Schools are great generally. For better or for worse. So the pandemic hit, we shut down. We fully committed to streaming our services online. But we were also kind of, as a church, probably one of the more front runners and being like, hey, like we want to like get back in person pretty soon.
Yeah.
And we have a couple. There's probably about 4 Bible believing Orthodox churches in Boulder, maybe one of 4, and the main one in town is kind of our granddaddy church, and they hook us up, they help us out when things are going south, and so they let us basically live stream fully set up a full studio where you could just walk in with the keys and just do our services week in and week out for a while.
Yeah.
And then we basically pushed to a parking lot in their parking lot to get people back together.
Yeah.
And I led worship in the back of a pickup truck and projected it through people's car stereos, man. That
Those
was
are the days.
There was one Sunday where I was playing kick drum on a suitcase and playing acoustic guitar, and I was like, I don't know if I could do this much longer.
Yeah. Out of the bed of a pickup truck. Nonetheless.
With a suitcase kick drum, man. It was like goofy, but we were doing it. And we were at a point where we knew we needed to reconvene formally again as a church. And we didn't have the luxury of our own building to just be like, push play, come on back.
Yeah.
And the school system in Boulder was basically shut down to people subletting because of the pandemic. They were like, we don't want any exterior exposure, for better or for worse, from exterior tenants. So we're not going to rent to you for that reason for the time being. So the bar that we ended up renting from in town was kind of a personal connection that our lead pastor had to the owner. And they were in a spot as well where they were like, hey, like, you know, we'd appreciate any business. Like if you want to rent from us and if that would help you guys, we're so kind of building back ourselves. And one of the musicians who is in our worship ministry, he's like a 60-year-old plus hippie rocker who got saved during COVID. He actually built the sound system in this bar. He's in my worship ministry. So it's kind of like a lot of things were like pregnant for us to be able to like move into that space, because we could almost go in day one and know the technological situation we were in. It's a live music venue. So it's not like you're just stepping into like a corner dive bar. It's actually like built out for regular shows. So we stepped into that and made an agreement with them and used it Sunday mornings. Our kids' ministry was in the warehouse next door to it. Just good thing they're kids, man. It's super gritty. Yep. And they just, had a blast in there. And we were able to have long-term storage on site there. Really we were a mobile trailer situation. Our trailer actually got boosted and dragged off into a neighborhood just before we were moving into the bar.
Dang.
And they took our entire sound system, just drug the trailer off and left it for dead in a neighborhood nearby. And so it was kind of providential because it was the one moment in time we did not need a sound system.
Oh my goodness.
And all of our other high-end equipment was actually under lock and key inside of our church that had been hosting us in the parking lot. But our speaker system was gone. So I was like, all right, well, good thing we're walking into a place that has, a decent EAW system or whatever. So that was our situation for about 3 years, kind of using this bar as a live music venue and whatnot. I will say the only thing I'll say like in the weeds is that's probably safe to say is over time, Boulder's probably become more attentive to what churches that are just Bible believing, Orthodox believing churches are doing. And it's kind of, I think, blowing people's minds when you subscribe to just basic Christianity that's been taught for 2,000 years. And we're one of those 4 churches that teaches those things. Yeah. And so when they find out that you're using schools, when you're using bars that don't fit values that are, popular in the People's Republic of Boulder, right, if you will, that upsets people. And it started to upset people in our local city. We've had people in the school system and people who have just become upset with that. And so we kind of realized that like we needed to move on. And there's some other circumstances that like made that clear. And we started casting lines out everywhere, man. Like, yeah. And it was getting to a point where it was the week before our lease was going to end at the bar. and we had nowhere to go.
Coming
And
up on it.
so we're like, I'm sitting, you know, looking at packing up our entire church into a 27-foot trailer in one day. And,
Oh my goodness.
I'm looking at that's okay. So that's what we're going to do this Sunday. I'm looking at that's at least we're going to start there.
Mhm.
And that week, one of the churches in town that we had been kind of reaching out to for a while, but had kind of been slow to kind of have a tenant on Sundays was a Seventh-day Adventist church, and Seventh-day Adventists use their facilities on Saturdays.
Yep.
And so often church plants really thrive in Seventh-day Adventist churches because actually, when I was in Kansas City, we were planting in a Seventh-day Adventist church because the facilities are perfect for what you need to do. You can just use them on Sundays.
Yep. And you can most of the time use them on Sunday mornings. You don't have to go to an evening service, which is clutch for a church plant.
It's a great church planning hack, man. Fully recommend. But they got back to us, and the week that we were without options, and I think in a lot of ways that was providential for our church to also learn what it means to trust God to the point where you have that Abraham moment where you're, got to do or die. You're going to trust God or not. Mm-hmm. And our church got pushed to that point.
Yeah.
And God came through. And we were able to step into a historic, the Boulder Symphony and Chamber Orchestra regularly uses this building because the acoustics are so good.
Wow.
Musically, that this 800-seat sanctuary that's built mid-century, we were able to move in there. I only had a week to figure it out.
Jeez.
From a worship ministry standpoint, that can be pretty hectic, but I think prior experience, our people are kind of used to that. Our musicians are kind of like, what are we doing tomorrow?
Yep,
okay.
Just roll with it.
And when you're in a church planting situation, your people are kind of like well-trained in that vein of existing,
Yeah.
So our people had great attitudes about it. And in a lot of ways, we felt like we were kind of walking into something that felt more turnkey. Because it's a church. So it's like built to do what you're doing week in and week out. So I'm like, we don't have to set up a drum kit. We don't have to set up in-ear monitors. We don't have to set up a full array of speakers. This is great. I can handle with anything else that happens from here. I can be fine with. So
and your kids ministry is not in a warehouse.
It's not in a spider-infested warehouse, man. So our kids are living large now. Yep. And so we're grateful for that big time.
Little things.
And dude. Yeah. And our musicians are looking at me this past Sunday like, hey, I'm done. Is there more stuff I need to do? I was like, no, man, you're done. You set up. Good job. It took you 10 minutes. Yeah. So like, praise God, you can actually focus on playing music. So
what are you doing? What are you kind of now with just the knowledge and kind of the experience of being moved from place to place, and kind of you're in a building, but you guys also bought a building that you are currently in the process of getting permits to renovate and to kind of build into your own facility. But it's just a long haul, right? That building won't be able to be occupied for quite a while. So what are you doing strategically now in the in-between to set yourself up for that next transition? Anything unique there?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I didn't get to that part of the story, but by God's grace, we were able to purchase a church building in the last year and a half in Boulder. And the city only allows churches to buy religiously zoned properties, which there's only like 26 of those in the city. So it's not like nuts. You can just go in like the South or the Midwest and just buy a warehouse or buy a strip mall or buy a Kmart. Those aren't legally allowed for churches to even make an offer on.
Yeah.
So we feel pretty fortunate to even have, it was a older Nazarene church that had closed and was prime location for us in the city. And so we are basically have been pretty delayed because, for better or worse as I can describe it, the town has taken its sweet time to approve our building permit. And it was, now that it's finally approved, we can actually make inroads on building it out. Yeah. And from my neck of the woods, it's kind of nice to kind of have all of our current assets not being used because we have a church building. So I can actually install our own sound system comfortably in that building, without also having to like use it as
Right.
opposed to buying two,
Right.
you know? So I would say, that's been a cool aspect of where we are now is, all of our live stream things that we do that have been mobile, all of our sound that's been mobile is just kind of now sitting and waiting to get installed. As far as like, how we're going to do it, there's been some sweet things where we have a member of our congregation, and we actually have two guys in our congregation who are professional audio engineers who
Cool.
are like, it's sometimes as a worship pastor in that kind of situation, you kind of feel like you're at the headwaters of an AV install or having to figure it all out, but it is a huge blessing if you can find someone. And I, by God's grace, to have guys like that now in our fold who are fully able to like design a lighting system and a projection system. And I would not think twice about the decisions that they're making. And I have
Awesome.
guys who can fully design an audio permanent install. And I could kind of just provide creative direction, if you will, and that's not always the case. That hasn't been the case for a lot of my life, but I definitely am kind of going to lean on them in many ways. And I think you should. Even so, even I think a lot of worship pastors, especially when they're in a church plant situation, can sometimes unknowingly treat themselves as like the Leonardo da Vinci of all things that need to happen in worship, and you end up like probably doing it like 70% great when you really should have just had somebody who's really good at like, sound engineering or live stream integration. Just do it. And you like sit back and pat them on the back and cheer them on,
Yep, that's right.
So that's probably where I'm trying to kind of be more comfortable in that. It's kind of new for me because sometimes you feel like, but I want it to be this or that. But ultimately, like, man, like it's been a big learning lesson for me about like focusing on still what's essential and what's the best thing you can be doing. And for me right now, that's like leading and playing music, and like lending vision and direction as I can. But, building out a building is, I would call it like a kind of like a big all hands on deck moment where it's like, I'll probably end up doing more than I would normally in terms of helping get it going, but then it'll be done. But that's kind of, I think, where we are. At best, we would be in there by Easter, this coming Easter, But buildings are buildings, man. Like anything can happen.
That's right. Yep.
So hopefully
you'll always uncover stuff you didn't even know existed, whether it be something you have to fix or update to be up to code, or
totally.
And again, permits is such a headache. But I'm just stoked that you guys are in the process and you guys are moving toward that direction. And I mean, I think it's a win for the kingdom in Boulder County, especially. I mean, to be able to, you said, even acquire and put an offer on a building is a pretty significant opportunity that the Lord opened up. So I'm excited to see you guys step into that season, but also really thankful for where you guys are now, and how the Lord has provided and kind of just sustained the ability to step into the next season of ministry. So, Scott, if folks want to follow along with you and connect with you, or maybe they have questions about the musicality piece of things, leadership of kind of the band structure, and they want to connect, where would be the best place to get a hold of you or to follow what the Well's up to?
Yeah. So, Instagram and Twitter are probably where I'm at least posting content a lot. So my Instagram handle is sgayer, SGAYER, and it's my full name on Twitter, Scott Gayer. I think I was lucky early days of Twitter to get that one. Early adopter, I guess. So those two, and then the on the musical side of things, I'm trying to put more of the Wells music online in the next coming like year and a half, but to get a kind of taste of musical idiom, I also run a retuned hymns music project called Forgotten Voyage.
Yeah.
And that is probably a good sample of like kind of the musical idiom I run in here just in our worship ministry. It's basically a collective of musicians that are retuning hymns that I work with to revive old hymn texts and set them to music that's palatable for people and enjoyable in a modern context. So Forgotten Voyage is on Spotify. So there's 3 albums up there. One is like a retuned album of all Spurgeon hymns, which is kind of a fun project.
Such a cool project.
Yeah, Spurgeon's hymnody is been one that's, I guess, people have really locked on to more because he wrote really beautiful hymns. And I didn't know that at the time when I wrote that album, but that's been a fun venture to kind of like, I involve some musicians from the well in that, and some from other regions that I've been able to play with. But those are the two main ones for sure. And
we're going to link it in the show notes so that people can check it out. The Spurgeon Hymns album is ridiculous. It's one of the coolest things I ever saw happen.
Thank you, man.
And musically was really inspiring. Like, it's definitely different from, again, your top 40s, but that's when I was listening to it, I was like, oh, there's an idea here. There's an idea here. It just kind of stirred my creative side, to kind of think outside the box. So appreciate you putting work into that. And I want to link that in the description, the show notes for people to check out, so they can get connected with that and even be inspired themselves. So appreciate you joining us, Scott, on the episode. And again, we're going to have you back for masterclass part 2. So appreciate you.
Mashup masterclass. We'll do it, buddy.
That's right.
I love that. So cool. Good to hang with you, Luke, last minute. And you do good work, buddy. I love what Churchfront's doing. That I feel smarter every time I watch your videos because I'm so tech dumb. Yeah. And I love the work you guys are doing.
Man. So. Awesome to be with you, Scott. Well, thanks for joining us again. Hope you have a great rest of your day.